been a bit of a gamble. We didn't really know how many people to expect. So it would be 20 or 50 or 2,000 or... Is this a bit loud? It sounds very loud to me. No, this is okay? It's just me? Okay. I will just hear me scream for the next 20 minutes. Maybe a little bit of background. So this is the second one in the series of the US, the fall summits. We've been doing this for a number of years in Europe already. We started in Zurich, where our headquarters is, many years ago. And I remember it was like 7 people in a tiny little room, and in the evening we just went to the pub and grabbed a beer. And then they started growing, and at some point in time we decided user group meeting isn't really the right name anymore, because a lot of people actually came that aren't yet users. And also here we saw on the registration list, of course there's about 200 people from AMT. A special welcome to you, which is great. But there are also a lot of people that we really don't know. So do make sure you use the next 2 days to grab one of us and you recognize us because we have name tags that say KNIME very, very large. Talk to us, introduce yourself. We are very curious to hear what you're doing, and don't be worried. We usually don't, we are all not salespeople. We're not going to try to sell you something. If you happily use the open source platform, great. So we'd still like to find out a little bit more. Anyway, so we had these summits going on in Europe, then we moved to Berlin for the last couple of years. This spring we had a summit in Berlin with almost 300 people. The strike and the storm on the East Coast kind of cost us those last 3 to crack the 300 boundary. And then a year ago we started to do that also in the US, because we have a fairly large user base here. We have a number of customers here, and we figured it would be nice to do that. We started in San Francisco. And then we said, let's try Austin. I've known this venue for a long time from Lynn Bender's Data Days, who's running those here every January, and I really liked it. We figured we'll try it, and it seems to be working out very nicely. So what I'm going to try to do in the next maybe 15, 20 minutes, I wanted to just talk very briefly about some recent highlights that happened at KNIME, that we at least believe are highlights. And then I thought I'll put what we do and how we do it a little bit in context with the summit and the program and some of the talks that we're going to see the next 2 days. So what happened in 2017, not sure how many of you knew, but for many years we have been contacted by VCs, Silicon Valley style VCs. We had stranger and stranger discussions with some of those guys, and very often it very quickly boils down to how do you turn all of these open source users over into paying zombies, right? That's never really been our goal. But early, sometime now in June 2016, we got contacted by someone from Invus, and the story they told us and the way we started talking to them was very interesting, and we figured that's something worth exploring, so we engaged in more in-detail discussions with those guys. That's a Belgian investment fund, essentially. That's an evergreen fund, which is very important, so they don't have the usual problem that every 10 years they need to show massive returns, but they can invest into much, much longer-term strategic investments, which really reflected very nicely what we wanted to do. We talked to them. So in March, they ended up investing in KNIME. In theory, you shouldn't really see a lot of difference, right? We are not planning on changing the culture. We're not going to plan at all. We're actually going to open source more than we had before. So the open source strategy, I'll talk about that a bit later, is not going to change at all. We should be able to hopefully use that investment to react quicker. I mean, one of the problems that we have hundreds of thousands of users, and it's really hard for a company the size. Back then when they invested, we were like 25 people to really respond. Even if you want to, it's hard to do simply for resource problems. Okay, so what happened next? We used some of this investment to bring on board 2 really cool people, Jim Falgout and Jeff Golik, in May, and KNIME now has an American presence, so there's a KNIME Inc. as it's supposed to be. It's incorporated in Delaware and has offices in Austin. Talk to our lawyers if you want to find out why it's Delaware, but everybody's in Delaware. So they started that. We got really lucky that a company that we used to that we actually still partner with, sort of kind of abandoned the big data analytics space, and Jim and Jeff were working there. So we've been working with these 2 guys for a long time, very successfully. They know the KNIME platform inside out, so they're essentially touching the ground running. And it's worth pointing out where they are. Jim is over there. So if you are interested in our US base, talking to Jim makes sense. Where's Jeff? Jeff is hiding somewhere. Jeff is back here. So this is the first 2 people on US soil, so to speak. And we're looking for more people. So if you're interested in doing cool stuff, open source analytics, enterprise deployments, talk to us. If you know someone who's looking for a cool job, I think we have to offer those. What else? July, we released KNIME 3.4. One of the more noteworthy things of that one, despite many cool new features, and we'll be talking about some of those in the next sessions, we open sourced the productivity extensions. That was the first step of making the open source analytics platform more, in a way, more complete and making this boundary between the commercial offering that we have to finance what we do and the open source platform that actually allows people to analyze their data. That was step number one. I'll mention the next step in a second. August, September, October, I was thinking about that. What were there any noteworthy news for anybody outside? I think we were just doing work, right? November is the Fall Summit. This is where we are now. Oh, this doesn't work anymore. Now it works. And a little peek into the future, maybe in December. Some of you who know KNIME know that we always release on December 6th. That's Nikolaus Day in Germany. This is where in the morning the kids wake up and they find chocolate and other unhealthy stuff in their boots. And everybody here finds a new KNIME release in their mailbox. But we're also going to do, in concert with that, we're going to open source all of the big data extensions. That's the last step of making sure that everything that's part of the open source analytics platform is out there in the open source, right? And then March, if you want to see Berlin, that's a nice opportunity to come over. It's kind of the bigger brother of this meeting. We have a full week. We have 2 days of training courses, 2 days of full summit, and then on Friday we have some workshops. We'll be starting announcing details about that in the next couple of weeks. And then in July, we have a biannual release cycle, so there's always December 6th. July is a little bit less crisp. Somewhere early in July, we tend to release the new versions of the analytics platform and server then as well. Okay, with open sourcing all of these things, it actually becomes a lot easier to talk about the KNIME software ecosystem, which is part of the reason. It's always a good sign if you do something and then you realize, oh, this makes so many things so much easier. And I wanted to just give a little bit of an overview how we position us, how we see KNIME and the KNIME Analytics platform. So for one, the central piece is obviously the open source. KNIME Analytics platform runs on your desktop, runs on your laptop. You can do anything you want, right? It's all open source. The code is out there. You can add your own contributions. You can add nodes. You can take the code. Maybe you don't want to do that. Talk to Bernd before you start downloading the code and build it yourself and start messing with it. But it's out there. You can use it to analyze data. No restrictions, no artificial limitations. That's not our goal. The idea is to have everybody who's doing data science being able to use that and be productive. Then on one side, we have the open source extensions, right? The KNIME Analytics platform is not something that does everything out of the box and is the best of breed for everything. We couldn't possibly be able to do that, right? Deep learning starts popping up, other cool algorithms starts popping up. There's a lot of community out there that does type algorithms, data connectors, other types of cool things that we can just integrate with, and we do that. Some of those integrations we contribute ourselves, so we maintain that ourselves because we believe those are critical for most KNIME users in a way. And some of the examples are obviously the R and the Python integration, right? This is not about competing against R and Python, but it's more about being able to wrap some of that stuff that people do in R and Python into KNIME workflows. We have the big data extensions, I mentioned that before. We have a deep learning integration, we'll see that later in some of the talks. Text processing, image analysis, some of the high-speed machine learning, we'll be talking about that in a second. That's something we essentially write and maintain the wrappers around those open source projects and make sure they run and are well tested inside the KNIME platform. Then on the other side, we obviously also have a very strong community and we have some partner extensions. So some extensions to KNIME are commercial extensions from usually scientific software companies that are producing really cool algorithms. They live off selling those implementations and they embed them into KNIME as well and sell those extensions as well. And examples here is, I mean, a lot of and that's really for historical reasons, a lot of the chem and bioinformatics functionality, it's something we wouldn't be able to really maintain that anyway because we'd barely understand what's going on those chem informatics, what's really deep down going on in these extensions. RDKit is a very good example. That's one of the extensions there. Some of the data providers providing wrappers around the data, will be having a talk about those later as well, signal processing and many more. None of these lists are exclusive, please, right? Let's be careful about that. And all of these extensions, the open source extensions and the community partner extensions, that allows us to actually present sort of a complete picture, right? You have a workflow that does everything from the data access side, bizarre data connections, transformations, a lot of the analysis and mining. Here is where a lot of the R Python integrations, for instance, fall into on the visualization side, right? We're not writing visualization from scratch. We're reaching out to some of these other JavaScript libraries, for instance, D3 and some of those, and the deployment, same story here, right? Often you're just wrapping around what's happening inside a database. Over here, you're wrapping around what's happening on your big data cluster. So KNIME Analytics Platform, in a way we position that. Who uses that? It's the people, it's the algorithm developers. Hopefully they sort of invent new algorithms. They make them available to others as a KNIME node. It's the script-loving data analysts, the types of people that are writing R and Python, but they have to deal with their silly colleagues who don't understand R and Python, right? Instead of teaching them R and Python, which takes long and which is usually not successful, you give them a KNIME workflow, right? And the KNIME workflow solves a problem, and there are a couple of few R and Python nodes inside that KNIME workflow. They do reach out to R and Python, but the colleague doesn't necessarily need to understand all of that stuff. Then, of course, all of the data wranglers, all of the data blending. This is where KNIME is really very strong in addition to the, in addition to the analytics, and we'll have at the very end of the summit, we have this, does it blend bingo? Where's Rosaria? She disappeared. Anyway, she's going to, all the way back there, she's been writing these, or, well, mostly writing it, sometimes also asking other people to write the does it blend blog posts, where just the idea of throwing different types of data sources together. And then, of course, what we call those casual workflow recyclers, whatever, people that might not necessarily be able to write a KNIME workflow from scratch, but they're very, very easily able to take a KNIME workflow and adapt it to their own needs, something that already solves a similar problem and just making sure it solves a new problem. And then, unfortunately, there are also other people out there, right? We have this, we want to support teams to be able to collaborate. It's often not only just one person writing workflows, but you have more than one. Rumors have it AMD has more than one person using KNIME. We have, somehow you want to help the business analysts, right? Some of those people shouldn't touch KNIME workflows, right? So we need to somehow deploy that to them in a much easier way, like as an analytical application. Upper management should definitely not be touching KNIME workflows. They just want to touch a button and get a colorful report. And then all of these compliance and IT manager stories, right? Somehow you need to make those happy as well. They tend to not be very happy when everybody just downloads an open source product from the web and does cool stuff, and then the person leaves and you have all of these bizarre KNIME workflows floating around and nobody really knows what that means. So for that, we add on the bottom of all of this, we plug in KNIME Server. And KNIME Server then gives, first of all, you have an on-premise solution. We also have cloud solutions. You'll see in some of the talks later. We'll talk about the cloud offerings as well. And KNIME Server gives you features for collaboration, allows to ensure compliance, allows to deploy best practices, define practices, and sharing expertise, right? Not everybody has to start from scratch, but you have templates for certain types of analyses. We have all of these automation thingies that the KNIME Server takes care of, just scheduling that the workflow gets run every night, these types of things, does some automatic analysis or data massaging, or a lot of the model management pieces as well, making sure models are retrained when performance starts failing. All of that type of stuff is something you do with the KNIME Server. And then, of course, the deployment, the results of the workflow or the workflow itself, how do you give other people access, or machines or applications access to those analytical results. That's all functionality that the KNIME Server offers. So this, in a way, if you want it in a nutshell, it's sort of the one-person tool. You can do everything you want with the data. We have a lot of people that we know of that use it in production, right? It's a small data science team. They don't have a need for compliance, best practices, sharing expertise, because it's 2-3 people anyway, or automation or deployment. But others, as soon as that comes into play, then the KNIME Server is where it helps solve these problems. Good. Now you're all getting nervous and saying, okay, this is all high level, blah, blah, I want examples. And then I was thinking what I would have usually done now, and I used to do that at previous summits. I've talked a bit more about guided analytics, how we solve a particular problem, or we had talks on model management. But this time I figured, why should I do that? We have everybody here, and there's a ton of really cool talks that actually address most of those issues, right? So if you look at this picture, you realize that a lot of this compliance, best practices, sharing expertise, the collaboration pieces, we have 2 talks of people who are actually doing that in real life, right? Joe Porter, all the way back there, started at Procter & Gamble, then Under Armour, now is Flywheel Digital. This is actually the first time I meet him in person. We have been exchanging emails for a decade or something, but we're finally meeting. He's been a great advocate. He's the person rolling these things out to a lot of people, knows what to do there. And then Alan Lucas here from Seagate talking about how they are going to start using KNIME at a much, much larger scale. Over here on the data provider side, something we recently started doing, working with the guys from data.world. David Potts has built an integration around that. We have a couple of nodes that allow you to very easily reach out and also put back data from data.world or to data.world. So that's going to be an interesting talk about some of those community contributions. Signal processing, right? We have a really cool extensions from Datatronic that were contributed, and those guys are talking about that, how they're using that, Accumotive, Daimler. Down here, the model management, this is the famous Phil show. At the end of the first day of every summit, Phil will be on stage and talk about a really cool new topic. And if you can look past the show, there's usually lots of interesting content in there. So it's a 50-50 cool show and cool content. That's really about using KNIME Server, or also in principle you can do that with the open source analytics platform as well, to automate a lot of models. So if you have thousands of predictive models and you want to make sure they all keep being retrained properly and you have different types of models, how would you do that? How would you automate these types of things? Up here, really nice talk by Man Ling. Every now and then we convince her to come here to one of our summits and talk. We've been working with those guys, her and Alberto, for 6 years, 7 years, a long time as well. So this is really using some of them. This is not quite accurate because that particular talk is probably not going to show a lot of really chem bioinformatics hardcore stuff, but it's more about the Unix pieces here, but it's also a community contribution that will soon pop up in the community nodes that you can install in the analytics platform. Then on the image analysis side, we have two very nice talks from NCI and from Vanderbilt University talking about how you can do biological image analysis. This could be pretty much any images, right? But those guys in the bioinformatics type field tend to have really interesting problems. On the deep learning side, we have Christian Dietz is going to do a bit of an overview of how we are, instead of implementing our own deep learning engine, we're integrating some of the ones that are out there, right? Christian will give an overview of what's going on in that space and what next steps are. This is one I'm personally very, very much looking forward to. We reached out to the H2O guys a couple of months ago. They have essentially a high-performant machine learning library, a really high-performant machine learning library. So in a way, it's very complementary to what KNIME does, right? We try to be fairly generic, address as many different data types as possible, and at some point in time, you will pay a bit of a price in performance. KNIME is fast, but it can still be tweaked a little bit. And integrating that so that you can reach out to something like H2O, that library, which also runs natively on a cluster, is of course a very interesting thing. So we have a first prototype. We released that in summer. We're still working hard on that, and Christian and Mark from H2O is actually coming and will be talking about that integration. Then the deployment of humans. This is something at this last summit I talked about that a little bit longer. This is how do you actually build web-based analytical applications without having to learn a totally new toolkit, right? How do you do that as a KNIME workflow? And we figured we'll do 2 talks about that one because it's really very many different angles on how you could address that. And it's a very nice way of using KNIME Server to deploy your workflows to others that don't see the workflow. They just see a couple of web pages that have just the right amount of interaction for that particular application. So Rosaria and Vincenzo will be talking about guided analytics in action, your flight is boarding now, and Greg is talking about sensors and sensibilities on Friday. Then 2 didn't really fall into any one of those outside categories. It's just cool usage of the KNIME analytics platform, right? David Wrong talking about workflows for petroleum exploration production. We just thought that's a really interesting application. That's the nice thing about KNIME summits. You sometimes have people come in and talk about stuff, I think, weird, I never really thought about it, but it's really interesting. In spring, we had someone, actually the year before in spring, we had someone who talked about how an online clothes reseller gets rid of the last 13 extra large pink shirts that he has in stock. They know their customer base so well that they know exactly who to send an email to and who will buy that shirt, this pink extra large shirt. That was fascinating. Maybe somewhat unethical, but anyway. And then we have Mohamed talking about fire analysis, bug safety, should also be very interesting. Enhancing internal audit risk effectiveness. Yusuf is probably the one who came furthest away, all the way from Australia. I'm looking forward to finally meeting you in person as well. And then, as I mentioned, the Does It Blend bingo, we'll use that Friday. That's sort of our closer show. Rosario and team will be just showing small little examples interactively. I think people get to choose what they want to see, right? Or they have to pick randomly. Okay, so if you behave, you get to choose a little bit, but at the beginning, it's pretty much random. Like a bingo, right? It has to be random. And then, of course, we'll also not only be talking about applications of KNIME, what you can do with KNIME, but we'll also give you an update about what's going on, what are we working on, what's going to happen, show up in the next release in December, and what's new since the last time you touched KNIME, or we were here in here on this continent, on the other side, on the West Coast last year. Good. With that, usually I would have gone through this agenda in a little bit more detail. I think I've shown, I hope I didn't forget anybody. If I did, don't take it personally, just come and kick me. There's the agenda for the next 2 days, pretty packed with all sorts of interesting talks. The morning of today will be all updates about what's going on in KNIME, and then we'll start diving in some of these talks I mentioned. And then on Friday, we are going to be closing at 4 o'clock. And there are, of course, also parties. So there's a little bit of logistics information. We'll do dinner tonight at the for some very strange reason, they dropped the beer, but I keep throwing it in there. It's Scholz Garden, which makes no sense to a German. It has to be a Scholz beer garden, otherwise why should I go there? So we're going to Scholz Beer Garden. It's really not that far away. We are up here, University Avenue, the AT&T Center. It's about 3 to 4 blocks. We figured we'll start walking from there in front at the registration desk. We have 3 people leaving, so that was Jim knows how to get there. You are going to lead the first team. Jeff will lead the second team, and then Iris also knows where she has to go to. Where's Iris? I can't find Iris. Iris disappeared. Ah, there, she's hiding all the way back there. Iris is going to lead the last team at 6:51, leaving there, and we'll have, what do we have? Heaven knows that. All sorts of barbecue, very light German cuisine, as you know. Probably a beer or two. Should be fun. And then on Friday, we figured after 4 o'clock, for those of you who don't have to instantly catch a flight, hang out a bit, talk to us. We'll have, again, out there in the courtyard, we'll have drinks and coffee, tea, and a cookie or something served, just to chat a little bit and end this summit on a friendly note. That's from my side. Thanks for joining us. Thanks again, all of you, for coming. I hope you enjoy this, and if you find something that you don't like, that you thought we could do better, do let us know. The last time I had a really hard time getting negative feedback. I hope you guys can do a little bit better. Thank you.